if I, you may disagree with me on this, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think this war's going to be over with sooner than I think we think it is. I don't know how they continue with this. I mean, for one, if they're launching 500 air defense, or let's say drones, missiles, etc., and there is no air defense, then that means all of them hit their targets. And if you do that night after night after night after night, and that's not just hitting targets in Kiev and these other things that you point out along contact lines. How does Ukraine keep that? Yeah, how does Ukraine keep that up? I don't know how to.
But that's something that we've asked for 3 years now.
That is true, but this is something a little different.
Yes, it's becoming greater. But for instance, I'll give you an example of how they continue. You remember, of course, Alexei Arestovich, the former Gobel-esque mouthpiece of Zelensky, right, presidential aide, who then I guess was a little too cynical or a little too honest at sometimes, selectively, and ran afoul of Zelensky and fled. I think he's in New York actually now. But anyway, he has become a very
somewhere. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think he was in New York, but I could be wrong on that. I know he does travel a bit, but I think he's shall we say resident.
They're out for his ass.
Yeah,
they're trying to get him.
Yeah. Anyway, he actually though continues to do interviews like with Ukrainian podcasts like this one, right? He still does a lot of that, and he's become a very harsh critic of Zelensky, of course, since running afoul of him, but also of this conflict and the decisions, it must be said, that he placed a key role in making to begin with, that, have led to, this conflict. And he said just in the last few days, that the Kiev regime is planning for the conscription of women by this autumn. Something that, we've long talked about, but the specter is being raised again. I don't believe that this regime will stop, right? It doesn't mean that they'll be able to resist as effectively, right? They'll lose worse on the contact line. Eventually, the territorial gains, again, which isn't Russia's primary goal at the moment, attrition, destruction of the opponent's military is, all of that will come faster. The Wall Street Journal was reporting 2 weeks ago already how that the Kiev regime is on the abyss of economic collapse, right? Yes. That they essentially have no economy and their need somewhere. There's all kinds of numbers floating around, from the 50 billion in U.S. or European aid a year just to keep the lights on, not to say nothing of the military needs, but just to support the government economically. Others that Zelensky is now saying he needs 150 billion a year.
Wow. Jesus.
Well, nice. At the other hand, you see things, the U.S. and Europeans continue to find ways. They're squeezing the IMF for every last drop that they can weaponize and direct into Ukraine. Another big tranche of money from the IF to the Kiev regime, right? The Europeans keep making promises about more aid, $800 billion or euros spent, resurrecting their, it should be said, I shouldn't say resurrecting, creating a military-industrial complex that they've never really had, to be perfectly honest. I mean, Merz is now talking about Germany building an army of 1,500 tanks and 3,500 infantry fighting vehicles and becoming the biggest army in Europe and reinstating the draft in Germany. There's all kinds of smack talk going on in Europe. Now, there's very little to no actual movement on any of this that I have seen.
Yes.
And I think most of it is desperation and panic and bluff and bluster and delusion. Not very different from Trump himself in this regard. No matter how much they may hate the man, they're in their own way they're paralleling that level of delusion. But this isn't over yet, and I don't see it ending. Azov, right? Azov started out as a paramilitary neo-Nazi organization on the Maidan, and then they were a battalion, and then they were a brigade, and then they were 2 brigades, and now there's been an official announcement with the restructuring of the Ukrainian military along U.S. Army Corps lines of the Azov 1st Army Corps, which means 50,000 Azov neo-Nazis that will be the Praetorian Guard of the regime going forward in this conflict, right?
I just don't know how they keep this up. And I hear you. And if we were talking 3 years ago, fair enough.
They still haven't lowered the conscription age for the 18 to 25 yet. That would net them another 500,000 potentially.
Yeah.
It's going to go on.
But the rate at which Russia is going through, like, I mean, we're talking about like 600,000-700,000 people dead at this point. And it seems that the front lines are moving faster and faster.
I would say closer to 1.5 million, but
okay, even more so my point. And the front lines, every day I look, Russia's taking more and more villages, more and more territory, and again, as you point out, that's not even the point. Like their objective is not even to take territory. Their objective is to effectively decimate the Ukrainian military. But
this regime, this Banderite regime, because that is what undergirds it, is ideological at its core, and the principal component of its ideology is hatred of Russia, anti-Russian. Yeah. And it will sacrifice each and every Ukrainian, man, woman, and child before it will give up and surrender. And there are plenty of Western politicians and commentariat who will whip it, right, and encourage it and cheerlead it to that bitter, bloody end.
Did I read somewhere that 40% of Ukrainians of age have been killed in this conflict already?
I have not heard that number. That number would be excessive, I think.
I need to find that thing, but it was something to the effect of 40%.
I mean, obviously they're experiencing a demographic crisis, right? I mean, this is just adding to multiple demographic problems that have been going on in the country since 91. And that added into all the people who fled the country, either to Russia or to Europe, right? The loss of territory and thus the population within that territory already reaching probably over 10 million at this point and continuing to go. A huge demographic crisis that is almost, I mean, Medvedev and others, I believe even Putin warned about this at the beginning of this conflict. If you continue down this course, it will mean the death of Ukraine as demographically and as a state. And that's we're charting that course. But Zelensky just put out a statement last week that optimistically they are planning that this conflict will end in 2029.
Okay, right here. So this looks like it's coming out of a European paper right here. Ukraine has already lost 40% of its working age population, Ministry of Social Policy.
Okay, that is not just in the conflict, of course, but in the number
in general.
of people, in general, who have left the country and refugees in Europe or Russia, because of course there's millions of refugees, that came to Russia, and also counting the loss of population in territories that are now Russia, of course, and they no longer have that as their population.
Jesus, wow.
Yeah,
Mark, before we close, can you give us a rundown of what's happening on the battlefield proper?
So first, military analysts are talking about what they see as a slowdown in Russian advances for about the last week. And there's various debates as to why that's occurring. I fall more on the way that Russia is planning, bigger offensives that are soon to come. And this is a bit of an operational pause and a breather before that. But that said, we're still seeing, very crucial advances by Russia, particularly right now in the Sumy region, where the Kiev regime moved troops out of Sumy to defend the Konstantinovka Pokrovsk area, where right now both of those cities are now effectively or very soon to be under siege. Right, they're facing an operational cauldron around both of those cities now developing. So they moved troops there, but then Russia started, of course, to advance on Sumy faster. And then there was political hysteria in Kiev over that, because, of course, that's once you reach the Sumy city, the capital of the Sumy region, then there's a highway more or less straight to Kiev, right? So then in the last week, the Kiev regime has moved a lot of troops back to the Sumy region, which has slowed down Russia's advance there marginally, right? A few local counterattacks and the like, right? But that has led to, of course, Russia again making gains faster in the Konstantinovka Pokrovsk axis, but also around Kupiansk, Seversk. Russia keeps taking key strongholds as they're not taking any of these places head on. They don't have the need to do that anymore. It's too casualty intensive still, right? To attack fortified positions head on. And while they needed to do that in, say, Bakhmut at one time in this conflict, now they have enough manpower and they have enough logistics power to just widely flank and envelop all of these places, choke off its supply lines, and while engaging it, to a lesser degree from the front, mostly with long range strikes, and just envelop. Right, this is it's not maneuver warfare per se, but it is the forming of attritional cauldrons around populated centers. And Russia doesn't want to destroy populated centers if it doesn't have to, particularly in East Ukraine. Right, it's, as far as they're concerned, it's their own cities. So the goal, of course, is to force a retreat because of the choking off of supply lines and logistics. But, of course, this is still leading to enormous numbers of casualties among the Kiev regime troops. And another key point where Russia continues to advance is the Dnipropetrovsk region, where Russia is taking a settlement basically every other day. Also in the south in Zaporozhye, all along the contact line. And yet the Kiev regime continues to try to break again into the Kursk region to the west of its original incursion point at Tyotkina. They keep battering their head against that door again and again and again. They just don't stop. They've never achieved any results there. I know the hope is to force Russia to withdraw troops from the incursion into Sumy to defend up there, but they don't need to. They have enough. The Wall Street Journal admitted Russia has 2 entire reserve armies just for the SMO that they haven't even used yet. And Russia is actually getting thousands of new troops or allied troops from Korea and from Laos now. Reported.
I saw that. I didn't understand the Laos thing. I'm sorry. Please continue. I did not understand.
Laos is a communist country, and supposedly, again, I consider this unverified until it actually happened. Korea is definitely doing it. North Korea is sending more troops. These aren't combat troops, and they won't be used, as far as I know, inside Ukraine. But they are combat engineers and sappers. Right, deminers. And they will be used in the Kursk region to demine territory and to rebuild, freeing up more Russian troops to participate. And it must be said, well, if they're in Russian territory, then they can also still be used to defend Russian territory. If the Kiev regime keeps throwing itself at the gates, they could be used in that capacity without actually crossing into Ukrainian territory as well. I mean, obviously, combat engineers are not fighters. They have specific and very important jobs, as part of the military structure. But basically, again, Russia already, in relative terms to the Kiev regime, overflowing with manpower, just keeps going from strength to strength as its allies are adding into this. Now, yes. I would say that aside from the battlefield, what is being heralded in the Western media as a potential black swan event is the sudden geopolitical worsening of relations between Russia and Azerbaijan, yes. And a lot of really, I believe, overinflated hyperbole and talk about a second front opening against Russia. I don't see that as a real possibility. Geopolitical tensions and the continual worsening of relations between Russia and Azerbaijan and Turkey, which are wedded at the hip, yes. But is it going to turn into conflict in Russia's south? No, I almost certainly. No. However much certain people in the West might like that to happen, they couldn't drag Georgia into opening a second front. I sincerely doubt that Aliyev, he's far too cunning. He's simply seeing Russia's attention elsewhere and weakened in Iran, and him and Erdogan have come up with taking, they're taking advantage of a window of opportunity to improve their geopolitical position and exert their dominance in the South Caucasus and elsewhere. That's what I see going on.
Is this a rapprochement with Armenia as a result? And this is the last question.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. In fact, it is far more likely that Turkey and Azerbaijan will take advantage of the separation to forcibly dismember more of Armenia, taking the Zangezur corridor that was promised to Azerbaijan during the ceasefire from the brief war a couple years ago that Pashinyan has never delivered on. Pashinyan continues, but that will anger both Iran and Russia. But that is far more likely than any real rapprochement with Armenia. Armenia will
just be clear. What I mean is Armenia and Russia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just be clear. What I mean is a rapprochement between Russia and Armenia.
Only such as Pashinyan needs. I have heard reports that Russia has actually increased their garrison at their military base in Armenia, but right. Pashinyan is pro-Western. He dreams that Armenia was an island off the coast of the United States somewhere. And he has begun an absolute domestic war against the Armenian Orthodox Church, which has finally fed up and demanded that the political opposition in Armenia stand up, in part because more Armenian villages on the still undemarcated border between Armenia and Azerbaijan at places, Pashinyan has just turned over to Azerbaijan under ever-increasing Azerbaijani pressure. And the Armenian Orthodox Church has just lost it over this. And Pashinyan has begun locking up the top priests of the Armenian, bishop, the metropolitan of the Armenian Orthodox Church. There's big domestic problems in Armenia right now. And I, in no way, stretch or form, other than the absolute necessity, can you consider any rapprochement between Pashinyan and Russia as possible?
Fair enough. I was just curious. Enemy.
The South Caucasus, whether we're talking Armenia, or Azerbaijan, to a lesser extent Georgia, because Georgia seems to have stabilized a bit, right? The South Caucasus is a mess. While Russia has all their geopolitical focus on Ukraine and having lost Syria, right? The South Caucasus is just, there's all kinds of foreign influence, internal factions. It's just a mess. The South Caucasus is a real mess right now, and it could be the next flashpoint 5 years down the line.
Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst. You can check out Mark on his Boosty, Boosty, as I was telling people in the chat. You can either check him out at Real Politic with Mark Sleboda or Mark Sleboda. Either one of those things will bring up his account. You can also check him out on YouTube. I'm sorry, not on YouTube, on Twitter at Mark Sleboda 1. Mark, you are fantastic. You really are. Great breakdown, man. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
You have a good one. Be safe. Mark is the best in the business in this. I swear to God he is. I swear to God he is. He does not get the level of support that he deserves, to put it